Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I bought my house 3 years ago after saving up for the deposit while living in a cramped flat share. I work long hours at a warehouse to pay the mortgage, so coming home to my own place is everything to me. My neighbor lives in the house right next to mine. When I first moved in, he seemed decent enough. We'd nod to each other when taking out the bins, nothing more. His garage backs onto my garden, and there's an outdoor electrical socket on the back wall of my house that the previous owner had installed. I'd never really paid attention to it until last week. I came home from work on Tuesday evening, tired as usual, and noticed something odd. There was an extension cord running from my neighbor's garage across the small gap between our properties and plugged into my socket. I figured it was just a mistake. Maybe he thought it was connected to his electricity supply somehow. These houses all look similar from the back. I unplugged it and knocked on his door. I explained that I thought he had accidentally plugged something into my electrical socket and wanted to let him know. He seemed embarrassed and thanked me for telling him. That seemed to be the end of it. But when I got home on Thursday, there it was again. The same orange extension cord snaking across to my socket. This time I was annoyed. I unplugged it again and went straight over. I told him there must be a misunderstanding because that socket was connected to my electricity meter and he couldn't just use it. He brushed it off, saying it was only worth pennies and asking if the estate management didn't cover all the outdoor stuff anyway. I explained that it definitely didn't and that it was my electricity he was using. He just laughed and said it was hardly breaking the bank, then closed the door. I stood there for a moment, not quite believing what had just happened. He knew it was my electricity and didn't care. Friday came and I made sure to check when I got home. The extension cord was there again. This time I was fuming. I walked over and hammered on his door, but there was no answer. His car was in the driveway, so I knew he was home. Over the weekend, I went to the hardware store and bought a lockable cover for the socket. It cost me £20, which might not sound like much, but when you're already stretched thin with mortgage payments, every expense matters. I installed it on Sunday morning, making sure to do it quietly so I wouldn't cause a scene. This morning I found a note pushed through my letterbox. The note said that since I had decided to block the community socket, he would need to charge his electric bike inside my house when it rains. He asked if I could leave my back gate unlocked on Saturday so he could bring it through. Community socket. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't going mad. He actually called it a community socket. It's attached to my house, connected to my meter, and I pay for the electricity. In what world does that make it community property? The worst part was how casual he was about it. Like asking to use someone's house to charge his bike was perfectly reasonable. Like I owed him something. I was so angry I had to pace around my kitchen for 10 minutes before I could think straight. Then I went over to his house and knocked on the door. I told him I had gotten his note. He asked if Saturday worked for me then, as if the whole thing was already agreed upon. I asked him if he was completely mental, wanting to come into my house to charge his bike because I had locked my own socket. He said he needed to charge it somewhere, and it was an expensive bike. I told him to get his own socket installed and reminded him that I had even offered to split the cost with him. He asked why he should pay for that when there was a perfectly good socket right there. I explained again that it was my socket, connected to my electricity supply that I pay for. He called me really tight about the whole thing, saying it was just a few pence worth of electricity. He was calling me tight for not wanting to pay for his electricity usage. I told him that if it was just pennies, then he should pay me for what he had already used. He said I was being ridiculous. I told him he was the one being ridiculous and that he needed to get his own socket or not charge his bike. Those were his only options. Then he said that everyone thought I was being unreasonable about this. When I asked what he meant by everyone, he admitted that he had told the other neighbors how I was acting over a bit of electricity. He had been going around the estate painting me as the bad guy, making out like I was some sort of miser who wouldn't share a community resource. I went home and called my friend who works as an electrician. I explained the whole situation to him. He told me the guy was taking the piss and that what he was doing was actually theft. He said I should report it to the police if it happened again, but it got worse. Over the next few days, I started getting dirty looks from some of the other neighbors. One woman who lives at the end of the street actually crossed the road to avoid me when I was walking to the shop. Another neighbor, an older man I'd always gotten along with, made a comment about how some people don't understand community spirit. My neighbor had clearly been busy spreading his version of events. According to him, I was the unreasonable one who wouldn't let him use a socket that somehow belonged to everyone. The breaking point came on Saturday morning. I was having a cup of tea when I heard my back gate creak open. I looked out the window and saw my neighbor wheeling his electric bike through my gate, heading toward my back door like he owned the place. I ran outside and asked him what the hell he thought he was doing. He said he was just coming to charge his bike like we had discussed. I told him we hadn't discussed anything, and that he was trespassing on my property. He said I was being dramatic and that the gate was unlocked. I explained that the gate being unlocked didn't mean he could just walk into my garden whenever he wanted. He said he thought I had left it unlocked for him on purpose. The sheer entitlement was unbelievable. I told him to get off my property immediately or I would call the police. He started getting aggressive, saying I was being a selfish neighbor and that everyone knew what I was really like now. He said I was the problem with this estate and that people like me make communities worse. That's when I snapped. I pulled out my phone and started recording. I told him clearly that he was trespassing, that he had been stealing my electricity, and that he needed to leave immediately. The moment he saw the camera, his whole attitude changed. He started backing away, saying there was no need for that and that he was just trying to be neighborly. I told him that neighborly would have been accepting my offer to split the cost of getting him his own socket. Neighborly would have been apologizing when he realized he was using my electricity. What he was doing was theft and trespassing. He left, complaining under his breath about how unreasonable I was being. But I wasn't finished. I took the video straight to the police station. The officer I spoke to was brilliant. He explained that what my neighbor was doing was indeed theft of electricity and that the trespassing was a separate offense. They went around to speak to him that afternoon. I don't know exactly what was said, but I saw him through my window looking very sheepish when he spoke to the two officers at his front door. The best part came later that evening. My neighbor knocked on my door with his tail between his legs. He apologized for the misunderstanding and said he hadn't realized how serious it was. He offered to pay for all the electricity he had used and said he would arrange for his own socket to be installed. I told him I appreciated the apology but that the damage was already done with the other neighbors. He promised he would set the record straight with everyone he had spoken to. Within a week, I had my normal relationships back with the other residents. A few of them even apologized for judging me without hearing my side of the story. One neighbor told me that my guy had tried to convince him to let him use his outdoor tap as well, claiming it was a community resource. The electrician came and fitted a proper outdoor socket on his garage wall the following weekend. It cost him over £200 because his garage needed additional wiring work. If he had just accepted my offer to go halves on a simple installation in the first place, it would have cost him £50 maximum. I'm 28 and my husband is 32. We have a 6-month-old son who's adorable but has developed quite the grabby hands phase. Anyone who's spent time around babies knows what I'm talking about. They reach for everything shiny, dangly, or interesting within their tiny grasp. The whole mess started because I've been on maternity leave for the past few months. Money's been tight with just my husband's income, but we're managing. I was looking forward to having some adult conversation when my friend said she wanted to visit and meet the baby. I've known her since college, and she's always been particular about her things. She works in marketing for some fancy company and makes good money, which shows in everything she owns. Designer bags, expensive clothes, the works. But she's been a good friend over the years, so I was excited to introduce her to my son. She arrived wearing these massive sunglasses on top of her head. I could tell they were expensive just by looking at them, all sleek and branded. She was dressed up as usual, carrying her brand new phone in a case that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. My son was being his usual charming self, gurgling and smiling from his bouncy seat. She cooed over him for a while, then asked if she could hold him. I told her, of course she could, but warned her to be careful because he was going through this phase where he grabs everything. I specifically mentioned that she might want to take those sunglasses off her head because he would definitely go for them. She rolled her eyes at me like I was being ridiculous and accused me of being way too overprotective. She said he was just a baby and she could handle him. I tried to warn her again, telling her seriously that he was lightning fast and gets excited when he grabs something, so he waves it around. I suggested she put the sunglasses somewhere safe. She brushed off my concerns and said it would be fine. The tone in her voice made it clear she thought I was being one of those helicopter moms. I exchanged a look with my husband, who just shrugged. We both knew what was coming. She scooped up my son, and he immediately lit up. He loves meeting new people. For about 30 seconds, everything was perfect. She was making faces at him, and he was giggling. Then she decided she wanted a selfie. She announced that the moment was so cute and she needed the picture with him. I told her that was fine, but asked her please not to post it anywhere because we weren't putting him on social media yet. She agreed dismissively while pulling out her phone with one hand and holding my son with the other. The moment that phone appeared, his little hands shot up like guided missiles. But instead of going for the phone, he zeroed in on those sunglasses sitting right there on her head. In one swift motion, he grabbed them and let out this delighted squeal. He was so proud of himself for catching something shiny. Then, because that's what excited 6-month-olds do, he started waving his prize around enthusiastically. The sunglasses went flying across the room. She let out this blood-curdling scream that scared my poor baby half to death. He went from happy and excited to absolutely terrified in a split second. When babies panic, they flail, and that's exactly what happened. His little arms went everywhere, and one of them connected with her phone, sending it crashing to the floor. I immediately took my son from her because she was still freaking out and he was crying. I focused on calming him down while she stood there staring at her broken phone and examining her sunglasses for damage. Then came the demand. She told me I needed to buy her a new iPhone and replace her sunglasses or give her the money for them. She said the total was £2,300. I explained that we couldn't pay that amount because it wasn't even my monthly wage, and I was on maternity leave. But more importantly, I told her I didn't feel like I should pay since she had completely ignored my warnings. She called me heartless for not being more understanding of how upset she was. I was too busy trying to calm down my traumatized son to care much about her feelings at that moment. My husband backed me up and reminded her that I had indeed warned her multiple times, but she wasn't having any of it. She kept going on about how expensive everything was and how we were responsible for the damage. She seemed to think that because it was our baby, we were automatically liable for anything he did. I pointed out that babies grab things. It's literally what they do at this age. I had given her clear warnings and even offered solutions, like removing the sunglasses. She had chosen to ignore all of that. She started getting really nasty then, saying things about how we obviously couldn't control our child and how irresponsible we were as parents. She claimed that if we couldn't afford to replace expensive items, we shouldn't have people over. My husband finally stepped in and told her she needed to leave. He reminded her again that she had been warned multiple times and had chosen to ignore those warnings. He said that her demanding money for her own poor judgment was ridiculous. She stormed out, but not before threatening to take us to court over the damages. She slammed the door so hard that it made my son cry all over again. Later that evening, after I had finally gotten the baby settled, I started second-guessing myself. £2,300 is a lot of money, even if we don't have it. Maybe I should have been more sympathetic to her situation. But then I remembered how she had rolled her eyes at my warnings and accused me of being overprotective. I remembered how she had dismissed my concerns and said she knew better. Most importantly, I remembered how her screaming had terrified my innocent baby. The next morning, she sent me a long text message demanding payment again. She said she had looked into small claims court and was serious about pursuing it. She also mentioned that she had talked to mutual friends about the situation. I showed the message to my husband, and he shook his head in disbelief. He reminded me that we had done nothing wrong. We had been responsible hosts who gave appropriate warnings. She had made the choice to ignore those warnings. I decided to respond to her text. I told her that if she wanted to pursue legal action, that was her choice, but we wouldn't be paying for damages caused by her own negligence. I also mentioned that I had witnesses to the fact that she had been warned multiple times. She never responded to that message, and I haven't heard from her since. A few weeks later, a mutual friend told me that she had been complaining to everyone about the incident, but most people seemed to think she was being unreasonable. She had been going around telling people that we owed her money for her broken items, but when she explained what actually happened, people weren't siding with her. Apparently, when she told the story about ignoring multiple warnings from a new mother about her baby's grabby hands, and then demanding thousands of pounds when exactly what she was warned about happened, people thought she was being entitled. One friend even told her that she should have listened to me since I obviously knew my own baby's behavior better than she did. Another pointed out that 800-pound sunglasses were probably not the best choice to wear around a 6-month-old baby in the first place. The whole thing ended up backfiring on her because instead of getting sympathy, people started questioning her judgment. She stopped bringing it up after a while, probably because she realized that most people thought she was in the wrong. I'm just glad my son wasn't hurt during her dramatic reaction, and that we didn't cave to her unreasonable demands. I'm a flight attendant for a major airline, and I've been doing this job for about 8 years now. I've seen it all: drunk passengers, crying babies, nervous flyers, you name it. Nothing prepared me for what happened on Flight 447 from Chicago to Denver last month. I chose this career because I love traveling and meeting people from all walks of life. Most days are pretty routine, but every now and then, you get a story that you'll be telling for years. This is definitely one of those stories. It started out as a typical Tuesday afternoon flight. We were running about 30 minutes behind schedule due to some weather delays, which already had a few passengers grumpy. I was doing my usual pre-flight checks when I noticed this woman in seat 12A. She was probably in her 40s, wearing expensive clothes and jewelry, and she had this air about her that screamed trouble. From the moment she boarded, she was complaining about everything: the overhead bin space, the temperature, the fact that we were delayed. My colleague was trying to help her get settled, but nothing seemed to satisfy her. She loudly complained that her seat was too small and that she had paid good money for her ticket. My colleague explained that she was actually sitting in one of our premium economy seats with extra leg room. The woman didn't care what we called it and said it was completely unacceptable. About an hour into the flight, after we'd reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign was off, I was walking through the cabin checking on passengers when I heard this loud banging sound coming from row 12. I rushed over to see what was happening. This woman was literally punching the entertainment screen in front of her seat. The screen was cracked, and she was still hitting it with her fists. I told her to stop and explained that she was damaging airline property. She angrily shouted that the stupid thing didn't have her show on it. She said she watched The Real Housewives every day at this time, and it wasn't available on the system. I tried to calm her down by saying I understood her frustration and offered to help her find something else to watch from our many other entertainment options. She didn't want something else and kept yelling that she wanted her show. She kept hitting the screen, and at this point, other passengers were starting to stare and look uncomfortable. I could see parents covering their children's eyes. The screen was completely destroyed. Sparks were starting to come out of it, and I was genuinely worried about everyone's safety. I told her that she needed to stop immediately because she was creating a safety hazard for all passengers. She screamed back that I shouldn't tell her what to do because she was a paying customer. That's when my supervisor came over to help handle the situation. He's been with the airline for over 20 years and knows how to deal with difficult passengers. My supervisor told her that she needed to calm down and return to her seat properly, or we would have to consider other options. She got even more angry and asked if he was threatening her. He explained that we were simply asking her to follow federal aviation regulations for the safety of all passengers. What happened next still gives me nightmares. This woman completely lost it. She started screaming at the top of her lungs, using language that would make a sailor blush. Then she reached out and grabbed a handful of my hair, pulling so hard that I thought she was going to rip it right out of my scalp. She yelled that we were all useless and demanded to speak to our manager right away. I begged her to let go of me immediately. The pain was incredible. She had such a tight grip on my hair that tears started forming in my eyes. My supervisor immediately called for backup from the other crew members, and within seconds we had 3 people trying to get her to release me. My supervisor warned her to release me now, or we would have to restrain her. She screamed that she would sue all of us and asked if we knew who she was. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only about 30 seconds, she let go of my hair. But she wasn't done yet. She started throwing things. Her purse, her shoes, even the little bag of peanuts we'd given her earlier. The captain made an announcement that we would be making an emergency landing at the nearest airport, which happened to be Kansas City. The whole cabin went silent except for her, continued screaming and cursing. The captain announced to all passengers that, due to a disturbance in the cabin, we would be making an unscheduled stop in Kansas City and apologized for the inconvenience. For the remaining 45 minutes until we landed, we had to keep her restrained in her seat with zip ties that we keep on board for exactly these situations. She kept yelling about how she was going to have us all fired and that her lawyer would destroy the airline. She continued ranting that we had no right to treat her like that and that she was going to own the airline when she was done with us. I tried to ask her to just stay calm until we landed. She shouted back, asking how she could be calm when she had missed her show because of our broken entertainment system. The other passengers were incredibly supportive. Several of them came up to me to make sure I was okay and to say they witnessed everything. One gentleman even offered to be a witness if we needed to press charges. One passenger told me that he saw the whole thing and that the woman was completely out of line. He hoped I was okay. I thanked him and said I really appreciated his concern. When we finally touched down in Kansas City, the police were already waiting at the gate. They boarded the plane and arrested her right there in her seat. She was still screaming and carrying on when they put the handcuffs on her. The police officer told her that she was under arrest for assault, destruction of property, and interfering with a flight crew. She screamed that it was ridiculous and that all she wanted was to watch her show. The officer told her she had the right to remain silent and suggested she use it. When they escorted her off the plane, the entire cabin erupted in applause. It was one of those moments where you really feel the support of people around you. 3 weeks later, I got a call from our legal department. She tried to sue the airline like she threatened, but her case was thrown out immediately. Not only that, but she was banned from flying with us ever again and had to pay for the damaged screen plus additional fines. You just never know what some people are capable of when they don't get their way. My parents always said that the smartest person in the room is often the one who speaks the least but observes the most. When I started at my current company 18 months ago, I was excited about the work. The job involved developing mobile applications for small businesses, and I genuinely loved the technical challenges. I had a solid track record from my previous job where I consistently delivered high-quality code ahead of deadlines. My approach had always been simple: do excellent work, help teammates when needed, and speak up when I have something meaningful to contribute. The team was small, about 8 developers plus our manager. Most of my colleagues were friendly and collaborative. We had weekly team meetings where everyone discussed their progress, blockers, and upcoming tasks. I always came prepared with notes about my work and would share updates when asked. If someone needed help with a problem I had experience with, I would speak up. Otherwise, I preferred to listen and learn from others. My manager seemed different from day one. He was the type who filled every silence with his own voice and seemed to measure engagement by volume rather than quality. During my first few weeks, I noticed he would often interrupt people mid-sentence or talk over quieter team members. But since my work was solid and I was meeting all my deadlines, I figured everything was fine. About 6 months in, things started to change. During our weekly one-on-ones, he began making comments about my participation in meetings. He told me I needed to be more vocal in our team meetings because he barely heard from me. When I explained that I shared my updates when it was my turn and contributed when I had relevant input, he said I just seemed disengaged. He pointed out that other people were constantly sharing ideas and asking questions. I tried to explain that I was engaged, just in a different way. I listened carefully to what others were saying, took notes, and would often follow up with teammates individually if I had questions or suggestions. This approach had worked well for me throughout my career, but he kept pushing. In the following weeks, the comments became more frequent and public. He would make announcements during meetings about how some team members weren't contributing much to discussions and that collaboration was key to success. He would look directly at me when saying things like this, even though I had just finished giving a detailed update on the complex feature I was building. Other team members started to notice the pattern. My desk neighbor, who had become a good friend, mentioned after one meeting that he was being really unfair to me and that everyone knew I did great work. The situation escalated over the next few months. Despite consistently delivering high-quality code and even helping other team members debug their issues, the manager kept focusing on my meeting participation. He started scheduling additional one-on-ones specifically to discuss my communication style. During these meetings, he would express concern about my career growth and insist that leadership required being vocal and taking charge in meetings. I would try to explain that I understood the importance of communication, but believed there were different ways to contribute effectively. I would point out that my work spoke for itself and that I did communicate actively with the team, but he would always respond that it wasn't enough and that I needed to be more like other team members who weren't afraid to speak up. Some of those vocal team members he praised regularly asked me for help with their code. I had become the go-to person for solving complex technical problems, but none of that seemed to matter to him. Things came to a head during what started as a routine weekly meeting. We were discussing a challenging project timeline and several team members were debating different approaches. I had already analyzed the problem thoroughly and had a clear solution in mind, but I was waiting for the right moment to contribute meaningfully rather than adding to the chaos of overlapping conversations. When the discussion continued, I noticed the manager getting increasingly frustrated with a lack of progress. Then, in the middle of someone else speaking, he suddenly turned to me and asked why I was always so quiet, sarcastically wondering if the cat had got my tongue. The entire room fell silent. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked back and forth between us. I could see some of my teammates looking uncomfortable, and others seemed shocked at how unprofessional the comment was. This wasn't constructive feedback about communication style anymore. This was just plain disrespectful. For months, I had tried to handle his criticism professionally and had even attempted to adjust my communication style to meet his expectations. But this crossed a line. He was trying to embarrass me in front of the entire team for no reason other than the fact that I didn't match his idea of what an engaged employee should look like. Without hesitation, I looked him straight in the eye and told him I was just waiting for him to say something worth responding to. The silence that followed was deafening. Nobody moved. I could hear someone shifting in their chair, and then a few people started coughing, clearly trying to hide their laughter. The manager turned red, and for the first time since I'd known him, he seemed completely speechless. After what felt like an eternity, he cleared his throat and mumbled something about moving on to the next agenda item. The rest of the meeting proceeded normally, but I noticed several teammates giving me subtle thumbs up or appreciative nods. After that day, something shifted. The manager stopped making comments about my participation style entirely. In fact, he seemed to go out of his way to avoid singling me out in meetings. When I did contribute to discussions, he listened respectfully and didn't push for more input. Word of the incident spread throughout the company. Within a few weeks, I started getting messages from other departments asking if I was interested in switching teams. Several senior engineers had heard about what happened and were impressed with how I handled the situation. 3 months later, I transferred to a new team with a manager who valued different communication styles and judged employees based on their actual contributions rather than how much noise they made in meetings. My old manager's team has struggled with turnover ever since I left. The one thing that keeps me sane during those long spreadsheet sessions at work is my daily coffee ritual. I'm what you might call a coffee enthusiast. Not snobby about it, but I definitely appreciate a good cup. Our office has a basic coffee setup in the break room. The company provides ground coffee that's about as exciting as watching paint dry. But hey, it's free and it has caffeine. Most days I just drink whatever's brewing, but sometimes I get the urge to treat myself and my co-workers to something better. About 6 months ago, I was at the grocery store and saw some really nice Colombian blend on sale. On impulse, I bought a bag and brought it to work the next day. I made a full pot and left a little sign saying it was free for everyone. My co-workers were thrilled. People kept coming up to me all day telling me how much better it was than our usual stuff. A couple of months later, I did it again with a different blend. Plus, I brought in some fancy vanilla and hazelnut creamers instead of our usual half and half. Same response. Everyone loved it. Then about a month after that, I brought in one more bag of premium coffee, 3 times total over 6 months. I thought it was a nice gesture that people appreciated, but I created a monster. There's this one co-worker, let's call her Karen because she fits the stereotype perfectly. She's in her late 40s, always complaining about something and has this way of making everything about her. Ever since that first time I brought good coffee, she's been obsessed with it. Every single morning when I walk into the break room to get my coffee, she appears like she's been waiting for me. She always asks if what I'm making is my special coffee or just the regular company stuff. When I tell her it's just a regular coffee, she makes this disgusted scoffing sound and complains about how disappointing it is. Then she still pours herself a cup anyway while making faces like I personally offended her. At least once a week she corners me and asks if I brought any of my special coffee and wants to know when I'm planning to bring some again. I keep trying to explain that those other times were just random treats and I don't have any regular schedule for bringing coffee. She nods along like she understands, but then asks me the exact same thing the next day. She talks about it in front of other people, like I'm some kind of coffee supplier who's failing to meet her expectations. She'll go on about how I used to bring amazing coffee and how those were the good days, but I guess those days are over now. It's embarrassing and annoying. I started avoiding the break room at certain times just to dodge her daily coffee interrogation, but today was the last straw. I was making my usual morning coffee when she approached with that expectant look on her face. She asked if what I was making was my special blend or just a regular office swill. I told her it was just a regular coffee. Then she asked when the last time I brought good coffee was, and I reminded her it had been at least 2 months ago. That's when she said something that made my blood boil. She told me I must not have gotten my raise since I don't bring coffee anymore. She said it with this smug little smile like she'd figured out some big secret about my finances. I saw red. For a split second, I wanted to ask her why she was projecting her own money problems onto me. She hadn't gotten any raises if she was depending on me for decent coffee. But I managed to control myself and asked her a simple question instead. I wanted to know why I would supply coffee for the entire office when we already get it for free. She started stammering about maybe starting some kind of coffee fund where everyone chips in. She was making it up on the spot and trying to backtrack from her rude comment. I told her I wasn't interested in organizing anything like that. Then I walked away, leaving her standing there looking embarrassed. A couple other co-workers had overheard the whole thing and were giving her weird looks. One of them even rolled their eyes at her. Later that day, I was talking to my supervisor about an unrelated project when Karen walked by. My supervisor mentioned how nice it was when I occasionally brought in good coffee and said she hoped I knew there was no expectation for me to do that. She said it loud enough for Karen to hear, and Karen hurried past. The next morning, Karen avoided eye contact with me completely. She poured her regular company coffee in silence and didn't say a word about it being disappointing. A few days later, I overheard her complaining to someone else about how people at this office don't appreciate nice gestures anymore. She was still bitter about the whole thing, but at least she wasn't bothering me about coffee every single day. The funny thing is, if she had just been grateful for the few times I did bring good coffee instead of constantly pestering me about it, I probably would have done it again eventually. But her entitled attitude and that comment about my raise killed any motivation I had to be generous. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.